Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Palm Estate Podcast. We are a podcast focused on informing families on what it is to age gracefully and get a preview into issues they may need to prepare for. When something happens, such as a fall, people have to act quickly and often without planning. We are aiming to get people more information earlier so there's less surprise and they have more context that's usable in that difficult situation. My name is Ashwini, and we're joined by my co-host Erin and some really exciting guests. And we're looking at things like long-term care insurance, deprescribing, end-of-life conversations, and cardiac care. Topics that matter to you and the people you care about today.
Thanks, Ashwini. We're really stoked for the listeners today. We've got wonderful guests, Jay Patton and Martha Saylor, who are professional educators and caregivers and medical practitioners in the space of caregiving. So I'd like Martha to introduce herself first, and then Jay. And then after those introductions, we'd love to hear what brought you to this space personally before we dig into the professional.
My name is Martha Abshire Saylor, and I'm an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. And I came to nursing kind of after some other career and now focus mostly on research to support people living with heart failure, stroke, and dementia and their caregivers, and programs to help support them as they navigate the difficult course that can sometimes face them as we navigate these things in systems and non-systems of health.
Hey guys, so thanks so much for having us. I know Martha and I are both really excited to be here. I'm Jay Patton. I'm a nurse practitioner with over 20 years of experience in cardiology, heart failure care. And in the past few years, I've made a career change myself to palliative medicine. I'm currently at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and I'm working on standing up a palliative clinic for patients with heart failure. Very, very interested in caregiving. Martha and I actually work together on projects. But I'm also a caregiver myself, so I'm excited about our exchange today.
Thank you both for being here. I think one thing that anchors us all as we listen to this episode and just have these conversations is the personal story or a personal story of what brought you to this space. And so I don't know if Jay, you would like to go first, or you can play the nose game with Martha and have her take it first. But we'd love to just get to know you a little bit personally around what brought you to this and the career path that you're currently on.
Well, it's interesting. I was in nonprofit many, many years ago. I worked for Save the Children in Atlanta, and I met an incredible nurse who said, you know, the kind of impact you want to have, you can have every single day as a nurse. And I already had my undergraduate degree, so I found an accelerated nursing program, and I can't even explain how cardiac came into my field of interest, but I think I landed in the right spot because I've been I've been a bedside cardiac nurse, I've been an ICU nurse, and I've done cardiac surgery and cardiology my entire career. Working in Baltimore City has taught me a tremendous amount about the challenges of having a chronic illness and the challenges of caring for folks with chronic illnesses, folks who have significant barriers to getting to care. You know, there's transportation or financial. People who may have limited health literacy and struggle with just understanding the complex medicine regimens that we put people on, or all the procedures and things that we can do. It's been, I'll say I kind of lucked into it, but it's been a tremendous education and a wonderful ride, and I'm just thrilled to be here. And it's great to meet people like you who are working in the space and concerned about caregivers. Ashwini, I thought your intro was so spot on. Like, if there's a fall, that sounds like such a simple thing, but so many things can roll behind that to make people's lives so difficult. And I think addressing that for folks in the community is a tremendous gift. So thank you.
And for me, I was in my early 20s when my parents separated, in part because of my dad's changing mental health. And he was a Vietnam veteran and was kind of facing some health challenges right in the midst of the opiate epidemic, and really was getting wrong care. And so was suddenly in my 20s trying to figure out, how am I supposed to step in, especially if maybe he doesn't want me to, but I also think he's unsafe. And so navigated that at the same time that I was trying to decide about nursing school. And then I went to nursing school in the mid 2000s, dating myself, and did that in Baltimore City. And about a year after I graduated, my husband was diagnosed with cancer and died about a year later. So all of my nursing experience is framed in my caregiving experience and bereavement. And so I think a lot about what it was to be a caregiver in my 20s and early 30s. But now, many years later, focusing on research in the critical illness, advanced illness space, where caregivers often are having to step in and own more responsibility. It's important to me. I also recognize that the types of caregivers I work with are not always the same type of caregiving I experienced. So it's important to me, especially, to make sure that I don't overly bring my personal experience to the table, that I make sure that I'm listening really well and learn how to ask the right questions so that the answers we bring are to the question being asked and not to my own personal challenges.
Martha, I am so grateful to have you be so open with us and our listeners about your own personal experience. Thank you for sharing that and giving us a little bit of a lens into how personal this is for so many people too. You're not alone in that. And that's part of the challenge here. I think something that Jay said at the very beginning in her introduction was that everyone has a different type of health literacy. And everyone, when we talk about financial literacy in some circles, and people now focus on that. But as you're talking about people having different standards of like what care means, Martha, I think that it's important to have a little bit of a conversation around what this concept of health literacy is, and why it's different for people. And so, Jay, maybe you can start, and Martha, you can provide some more context.
Absolutely. I think that what Martha said about we're taking care of patients who are more and more critically ill, and before the program, Aaron, we were talking about how I work with LVAD patients, left ventricular assist device patients, and that it's essentially an artificial heart where the pump for the heart resides inside the body and the power source resides outside the body. So, and there's a drive line that goes from that device outside, essentially in the abdomen, and attaches to the power source. And so we have caregivers who we are asking to learn how to troubleshoot if there are alarms going off on the LVAD device, who are learning how to manage those power sources, and they carry this tremendous weight, this tremendous fear, because in fact, if the power source isn't maintained, the patient could die in real time in front of you. And we're asking patients eventually, the goal is for them to learn how to do that themselves. But initially on discharge, most of that is carried by caregivers. And I think that's an extreme example, but it's a very real one. I take care of LVAD patients every day. But when you see the medication lists that some of our patients go home with, I mean, if I have a patient who has heart failure, diabetes, and coronary artery disease, three very, very common diseases in the United States of America, they may be on 15, 20 medications, and I'm not exaggerating. And we're asking family members to navigate pharmacies and prescriptions and insurance companies and everything that it takes to be able to maintain that. So we're managing somebody's care in 2024 is a challenge. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of organizational skill. It takes knowledge, and it takes time and effort. So I think that for medical professionals like myself, it's important that we're cognizant of what we're asking, not just of patients, because we ask a lot of patients too, don't get me wrong, but of caregivers. And this is unpaid work that we're asking folks to do. So health literacy, I think, applies to so many aspects of people's care, but we sort of demand that our caregivers and our patients get up to speed and understand what's going on in a very complex system.
How do you suggest caregivers kind of get up to speed in those scenarios where they are transitioning, say, from a post-acute situation or a discharge situation to, now taking on that responsibility of helping their family member recover at home?
the concept of health literacy is pretty broad. It means to be able to access, understand, evaluate, and then interpret all of that to make good choices. And that has a lot of assumptions built into it. Access, where are you accessing? Is it, Googling some disease and then trying to interpret everything that Google gives you? Or are you going straight to the source, like your physician? And what if they give you a package of papers that's 40 pages long? What part of that are you reading, and what part of that is coming at you as the priority? And so I really think patients need for their providers to be helping to distill information. And I think one of the best resources that we can point patients to who have common conditions, ones that Jay pointed to, like heart disease, these large national organizations like the American Heart Association and American Lung Association, Diabetes Association, they have a wealth of resources for patients and caregivers about how to manage their illness, monitor for symptoms, what things to be looking out for, how to think about physical activity, how to think about changing nutrition. But I mean, biggest picture, I think mostly we come to medicine in the US, we come to healthcare in the US for medicine. And so when a physician or nurse practitioner or a PA is prescribing something, they're first giving you medicine, and they're hoping to help you take that medicine in a way that's helpful to you to relieve your symptoms and manage your illness. And then hopefully they're setting small goals with you to help you manage lifestyle changes that will keep you in the most healthy place possible. And I think apart from that, we're asking a lot of people to try to take on all of health in one go in any healthcare encounter.
I think that you bring up a good point. As a patient or as a caregiver, developing that relationship with your healthcare provider and being able to say, "Hey, I'm not sure what you're trying to tell me about the side effects associated with this medicine, or how do I take this properly?" Or someone that you're comfortable calling and saying, or using the electronic medical record to send a message to and saying, "I'm having a side effect or I'm having a symptom, and I wonder if it's a side effect of that medicine you started 2 days ago." Lines of communication are important to keep open. And I encourage folks to make sure that they have that they're comfortable with their healthcare provider. If you have a healthcare provider who's not willing to answer your questions, then it's worth taking the time to find another. There are a lot of resources, and they're not standardized across the country, but I know in my career have worked in disease management clinics where there are nurses on staff who can do a tremendous amount of teaching. That's a resource. If you find a clinic like that, your visits there might be a little longer than you're used to, but you can get all your questions answered. So advocate for yourself, communicate when you don't understand what's going on, because in healthcare, we are encouraged and trained to be rapid fire with each other. My wife tells me all the time, "You just need to slow down." but it's okay for you to ask us, "Hey, can you slow down a little and make sure that let me check in and make sure that I understand what you're telling me." Keep those lines of communication open with your healthcare provider. And if you find a great teacher or a great ally within your healthcare system, hang on to them, because they're worth their weight in gold.
We've heard in multiple conversations that it's important to slow down and like to make the right decisions here, because there are so many things to figure out. For example, in what you're talking about, when someone has 15 different medications, I don't have that personal experience of needing 15 medications yet. When I was younger, I was on a nebulizer every morning at 5:30 in the morning for 30 minutes to get over asthma. But I haven't been on 15 medications at once. And if they all have to be refilled at different times, or they have different, schedules of when they get refilled or not, um, what times of day, just managing that, I think, is an overwhelming thing to figure out who you can work with to figure that out. And we do know that family members have different um, abilities under various regulations to help with medication versus caregivers. So like a family might be able to help you set up your pills, but a caregiver might not be, unless they like have specific licenses or credentials. So there are things to sort out here that are really hard. Um, in this
Can I
process of
Could I
Go
ask a
ahead.
question there, Erin? So different regions may have different ways that they term this, but I just want to clarify the way that you're thinking about that. So I would use the terms direct care worker. So a direct care worker may be in the home and they may be licensed or unlicensed. It could be someone who has a med tech training, and so they are allowed to give medications, or they could be someone that's hired to be like a personal assistant, versus all the way up to a nurse or someone who does home visits as a nurse practitioner or physician. And then I think of family also as family caregivers. And I just want to clarify if that's also what you're thinking of here.
Yeah, so what I do, I mean, family and trusted friends as
Yeah.
caregivers, right? You have a very close circle of humans that aren't like part of the quote unquote healthcare system. But
Mhm.
as we have so much operational tax to pay in the healthcare system, like it's just hard. There's a lot of inertia. There's so many things to do. We were talking about discharge earlier. Family and friends get like pulled into the picture and have to be part of the picture in order to have like really good outcomes here. And so that's the distinction that I was making, Martha, where some healthcare professionals specifically can manage medications, and other people that you might believe are healthcare professionals because they're part of a care team might not be able to do that, whereas family members can. So that's really the tricky component of the trickiness here.
One thing I want to add here is, I mean, I'm already stressed just thinking about the scenario where, if any of my family members need to manage 50 plus medications or experience some kind of condition that, we all have to step up to the plate and support them, just the sheer number of things that we would need to manage. Martha, I know you've done some incredible research just in terms of how to adequately enable caregiving teams to manage all of the logistics and also the stress and help set themselves up for success. Could you tell us a little bit about what your findings were and kind of what your research entailed?
Sure. So we have spent quite a number of years working with patients and caregivers of people with heart failure mostly, and also recently with stroke, doing home visits, taking pictures of the parts of the home where they do caregiving, looking at supplies they have, meeting with them, asking what kind of programs they might want, and eventually developed a program we call Heroic Heart Failure Resilience Intervention for Caregivers. The acronym is not a perfect fit, so don't try to make it work. And in Heroic, caregivers meet with a nurse one-on-one via Zoom or phone call, and they spend an entire visit. We call it doing a whole person assessment, really building rapport, trying to understand all the competing demands that the caregiver is facing, their work, their other family, what jobs, what roles they have in the home, what they like to do for fun, where their values are driving their caregiving and where they aren't. Um, and then in the second visit, we actually focus on life purpose as an overall motivator, and how much of your life purpose is rooted and connected to caregiving and how much of it is not. And in every visit, we set a small physical activity goal and we set a small self-care goal. And sometimes that self-care means taking some caregiving off of your plate. And sometimes it means, focusing on something like getting your nails done, or asking someone else to mow the grass, or, a variety of things that give you time or space to focus on your own needs. Sometimes it's making a healthcare visit. We do an activity we call the social circles, which is to think about the people in your life who are close, that you regularly connect with, maybe a daily text or phone call. Who are those people? And then we think about kind of a middle range, maybe a weekly contact, and a long-term range, maybe a monthly contact or just a couple times a year. Who are the reliable people in your life? Who are the people who've offered to help you in some way and you've never taken them up on it? And we just talked through those social circles, like how can we think about engaging those people in caregiving for the person you're caring for, and how can we engage them in helping you find your life purpose and bring yourself joy and recognize the things you love to do can still fit into your life. And then we spend a couple more visits usually with that goal setting, and also thinking about clinical and community supports that might also be helpful. Really, the most common situation we find is that people have a pretty good social network and they just haven't asked. And it's really hard to give yourself permission to ask the people in your life to help you, but they usually want to. And so one example I can think of is that there were these brothers, twin brothers, caring for a mom, and the mom lived with one of the brothers, and the brother was getting tired, and meals were a particular challenge because heart healthy diet is not always the thing that the person living with heart failure wants to have. Well, in our program, the nurse worked with the brother, and they decided, you know what, maybe I could ask my brother if he could take mom out to dinner once a week. And then I could get out, I wouldn't have to cook for her, and he would get involved with her, and that would make me feel better about him. So just these really small asks. Or another caregiver set a goal for herself to have a date with her husband. She wasn't caring for her husband, she was caring for her dad. But she realized, gosh, I've been letting my spousal relationship slip a little bit. I need to make sure I reprioritize that. And just having a little conversation with someone to give a little bit of accountability to say, oh no, I'm really going to prioritize that this week. She made it happen, and they're still together. That's great. So I think the gist is make sure you remember self-care and also think about your social network, and ways that they can be engaged in caregiving and also to support the caregiver generally. Caregivers improve their mental well-being, which is our primary outcome, the thing that we're most concerned about. We measure things like resilience and self-efficacy or confidence to achieve things. And we see good movement in all of those measures, but we haven't done big studies yet. So we're hopeful to do those in the coming years.
What this makes me think about is something that Erin and I have been kind of tossing back and forth, which is our desire to take things off of people's plates so that they can have more authentic relationships with each other. One of the things we've heard quite frequently in our conversations is logistics, the tax of caregiving, just emotionally and physically, it starts to wear on relationships. And, your story of the woman who is re-engaging with her husband or the two siblings who just need to communicate, I think it's important for all of us to remember that our communities are there, but our relationships are sacred. There are lots of ways to talk to each other, lots of ways to kind of refill our cup. And it's important to remember that our cups are emptying when we're caregiving and we got to fill it back up. And other people need to come in and help occasionally. It's okay to ask.
I think it's
Absolutely, Ashwini. I think that was so nicely said. I'll say I'll share a personal story and also want to shine a light on something that Martha said is that we talk about the challenges that the many medications, and I described the bad management and what have you. But I want to be clear that I think that many of our caregivers have so much skill and so much resilience, and sometimes just it shining a light on that for someone and saying, "Wow, look at you managing the oxygen. I remember a month ago you were intimidated by that, or oh, you got those medicines down, or just really kind of acknowledging the amount of work and labor that the people have done to become skilled, because people really do become skilled caregivers. I will say that for me as a caregiver of my 94-year-old father who is on hospice, um, I love your idea of taking stuff off of the caregiver's plate. A lot of times I'm walking down the hallway at Hopkins on my way to a consult on the phone with the visiting nurse saying, hey, make sure that we refill this medicine and that medicine, because you have to juggle. You have to be able to do things. And I know at one point my dad and I had a little head to head because I really needed somebody here a couple of nights a week so that I could stay at work. Right? I mean, I love my job. My job is so important to me, and I worked my whole life to get where I am. And he's proud of me, and my mom was proud of me. I mean, it's a big deal for our family. And he wanted me home at 5 o'clock every night to make dinner. And I had to kind of stand firm and say, no, we're going to hire somebody to come in who's going to help you with dinner a couple of nights a week. And so finding those things that are so key. I mean, that the date night, I think Martha was a perfect example. What is it that you need? I need to have a couple nights a week to stay late at work and then maybe grab dinner with one of my daughters, and standing firm in that.
what I hear too in that, Jay, is this, there's so much to do. And that if we're in a place where we can afford like hiring assistants, that's one thing. But as Martha is saying, there are also social circles where we just have to figure out how to coordinate all the love that surrounds us with people who are willing to help out.
I want to say a little bit too about Jay was talking about strengths. Caregivers are incredibly resilient. They are taking on extra and doing it well. And I think there is a resistance out there, in caregivers that we've talked to describe all of the work of caregiving in the language of burden and weight and heaviness and work. Because most caregivers are providing care to someone that they love, they deeply love. Half of caregivers are spouses. Another large portion of caregivers are adult daughters. They love this person, and they feel a filial responsibility. There are some cultures, especially that they're taught from a young age that they should expect to care for their elders, and that it's a privilege to care for their elders. And so there is that experience that's so out there, and we deserve to have people come around us if we have extra needs. And so, to the point of longitudinal needs that extend beyond that acute hospitalization, I think that's where programs like adult daycare, senior centers, faith-based communities, and programs like mine that are, research-based, but could be placed in a community center or another setting, or even out of the health system itself, really have a place. Because as you recognize that your own just naturally evolving emergency help has stepped in, they've filled the role. Oh, but there's going to be monthly needs to go, or twice a week to physical therapy, or 3 times a week to cardiac rehab, or whatever the thing is. That's the great opportunity to say, you know what, this is going to be for the long term, and I need to figure out a plan. And sometimes it takes someone else to help you recognize that and strategize, and then decide what people's strengths are that they can bring to figure out the best solutions so that everyone can be happier. That's what we all want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from both of you around some of the early signs that it's time to start checking in.
So I think you guys actually started off this conversation well and thinking about things like frailty and falls. Falls are a serious indicator that that something's going on, and that folks need help, and can also be the beginning of a series of health events that that can leave people more debilitated and lead to death in some cases. So that's sort of an extreme example. Watching for balance issues. Like, who was saying, actually, I feel like it was you, maybe someone I was talking to recently was like, when you're going, oh no, this was on social media. You're going home for Thanksgiving. Take a look at your loved one. How's their balance? How's their grooming? How are they on new medicines? Do they seem to be handling those okay? And Aaron, I think earlier you mentioned something about financial literacy. I know early on, when my sister and I realized that my parents were going to need more help, the big thing was I got a call from my mom that there was a guy at the house trying to sell them a new roof, and my dad was about to sign a big check to have a new roof put on the house. They'd had a roof put on the house 4 years before. And that was a moment of, oh wait, this is he's struggling with a cognitive issue. He's vulnerable to this guy who is trying to sell him something he doesn't need, with a price tag of like $20,000. So those are all things that are sort of red flags. And I love the idea that when folks are going home for the holidays, you have an opportunity to do that quick assessment and see what are things that might have changed, that might signal things are getting worse. And Martha, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're looking out for is cognitive impairment. So cognitive changes, and the ways we look out for that is decreasing previously valued activities. Like, if you have a family member who has loved to golf and all of a sudden they aren't golfing anymore, is that because of a physical ailment, or because it's too challenging to coordinate it and they can't quite remember all the steps? Devices, some of us are just not tech inclined, but if you have a family member who suddenly is not calling you, then it could be that they're facing some cognitive impairment. Keeping an eye on medications, or asking someone to keep an eye on medications, like at the end of the month, the medication should be used. And so if half or more are left, they're not adequately managing their medications. Certainly falls. And some of those things, like noticing if they're not grooming themselves in the same way, or going to the barber or getting their hair done. I would say memory, like we think that memory is the thing, like, oh, somebody's being really forgetful lately, but it's not just recalling a thing. It's noticing there's repetition in conversations. It's noticing that they aren't participating as much anymore. And then the other thing, just to say with all of that, is hearing impairment is a thing. And actually, hearing aids are way more accessible now than they've ever been. So it could just be hearing, and maybe it's time to get a hearing aid. And then on the other side of things, you know, certainly falls, but also weight gain and weight loss, and strength. So these all kind of pull together a picture of frailty. But if someone has had unexpected weight loss, but also if they're taking on fluid and their legs are getting really full, or large or swollen, that's definitely something to notice. And we could come up with probably an even longer list, but those are certainly some places to start. Sometimes I think we get a little too stuck on trying to find the right care. Primary care. So if you have questions, always go to primary care first. So primary care might be referred to as a family doctor. For older people, they might be called a geriatrician, geriatrics, or care for someone who's older than 60, 65. An adult health provider or a general internal medicine doctor. It could be a nurse practitioner, it could be a physician's assistant, but that's the real source. And that person can then give you specialty care as needed. But, in the instance of double vision, there's a variety of things that can cause double vision, but start with your primary care rather than starting with the eye doctor and, or catastrophizing and thinking, oh, the worst. Primary care is always the best place to go to get an initial assessment and then get pointed to specialty care.
I want to tie it back to another episode that we've had. When you have people who are on a lot of medication, there's a high likelihood there's a side effect happening, especially if they're on new medication. So if you go home for the holidays, or you're talking to a family member and you notice that they're gripping onto the handrail more than they used to, they're a little out of breath, perhaps their diet has changed, they're more nauseous, they are getting dizzy, whatever that is, pay a little extra attention to it. Ask them if they're on some new medication. Ask them a couple follow-up questions so that you can go to your primary health doctor and, equipped with a lot of context that you can provide to them. There's just more room for complexity here, so just bear that in mind. We were also talking to a wonderful founder who, is building home monitoring systems, and some of her solutions involve just kind of encouraging seniors to slow down. She said a lot of falls happen when someone's rushing to the door or rushing to get up and they trip over something, or, they forget to grab their cane. So when you're at home with your family, just reiterate to them that there's no need to rush. You can grab your cane. We will go at your pace, and just try to be there for them. So remember to slow down. Again and again, we'll keep saying that, but remember to slow down.
And Shwini, I love that you're talking about interventions and things that we can do to help people. And underlining what Martha said about your primary care provider. Taking an issue with your medications to your primary care provider, or balance, or whatever it may be. There may be interventions that you may not be aware of. I mean, we recently started using a pill pack system and this helped us diagnose that my father was having trouble with his medicines, but they essentially send the entire month's worth of medicines in day by day little packs, which makes taking the medication easier, but it also makes it easier for you as the family member who maybe comes, once a month to say, wow, we still have a lot of these packs left. Right. So it helps your loved one, and it helps you too as a caregiver. And I think looking for creative solutions. I know physical therapy and occupational therapy are often tremendously helpful, and people often don't think about it unless they've had a big surgery or something. But if somebody's struggling with balance, and if they've had a fall, a lot of times they'll qualify to have insurance pay for physical therapy. So get them in there. That's a tremendous resource, and it can make a huge difference. I find there are often a lot of resources out there that we don't know to ask for, and primary care can be a great place to start for that.
Jay and Martha, you both have personal experience as caregivers as well, outside of your work as medical practitioners. A lot of our listeners are also family caregivers. Whatever you're comfortable with, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your individual experiences caregiving for your respective family members, specifically lessons that you've learned and strategies that have helped you manage that experience. The, weekly pill packet sounds like one of them, things like that, that our listeners could potentially benefit from.
I'll give you two scenarios. One, when I was caring for my husband who was dying of cancer, I actually had the opposite experience of too many people who wanted to be involved all of the time, which, I'm not sure that happens to everyone, but he was really loved in our faith community and in our local area. And I found it overwhelming. So if he had someone who wanted to come visit as an introvert, I didn't want to have to manage that person. And so we had a good friend who had a pool, and I would go have a swim when someone else came to visit. So leveraging the time when someone's visiting to do something to take care of yourself, and also know that your energy is how you get energy and need to take care of yourself. On the other side of things, I was helping to support my father-in-law who was dying of vascular disease, and he was a grumpy old man. And he really refused his direct care workers on a regular basis. He was pretty rude to them, so much so that he was alone in the house, falling a lot, having to call ambulances, but he still deserved to be clean. And getting him in and out of his bathroom was a danger to himself and to me. And so trying to get him showered in the shower, there came a point where it was no longer safe. And making the call on that was really important. It helped us kind of recognize, this is a transition point because we can't get him in the shower anymore. But also just recognizing he wasn't able to support his weight at all. And I couldn't manage him in and out of the shower by myself, even as an experienced nurse. So I guess recognizing your limits and that it's okay to have limits. We couldn't move 3 hours to be near him. So I think there are times when you just have to say enough is enough and we need more help. And there are places to call. And for us, we had to get him inpatient, to be seen inpatient after his recent fall, and then get him into rehab so that we could make a real plan.
Oh, wow, Martha. I didn't know this. Martha and I are friends outside of work, and I had not heard that story. That's amazing. I can share a very personal story right now that I'm living as we speak. So we moved my father in with us about 9 months ago, and he had been diagnosed with interstitial lung disease, which he's 94, and that will likely be his life-limiting diagnosis, what he dies from. And I had a long talk with his lung provider, his pulmonary provider. And she said, Jay, if he doesn't want to go to the hospital or be going back and forth to the doctor so much, you can think about hospice. And that has been, and as a palliative care provider, I make referrals to hospice all the time. So I can speak about that from a professional standpoint. But I think for this forum and for your listeners, just from a personal standpoint, it's been tremendous. So we talked, and Aaron, I think you sort of alluded to this earlier. Paying for caregivers to come into the home as private duty caregivers can be very expensive, and it's not available to everyone. And even for us, it's a little bit of a financial strain. Hospice has allowed my dad to have 2 days a week of a home health aide. That's been tough for him. He's not rude, but he will say, no, I'm not getting in the shower. But he's started to accept that help now. A nurse comes into the house once a week. A hospice chaplain comes into the house once a week. We love him. And we have a hospice volunteer. So we have coverage, and not that somebody's here all 8 hours, 9 hours of the day while I'm at work, but we have help every single day. And it's people who are focused on my dad and his well-being and what's important to him. I think his favorite person is the volunteer, because she's apparently, I haven't met her yet. She's a really nice lady, and she'll just sit and chew the fat with him. And it makes him so happy. You can tell he's much calmer and in better spirits when I get home the days that Barbara has been here. Another experience that I had with a dear friend, and this is a completely different direction, but you'll see that this is definitely the palliative nurse practitioner in the room talking, is the importance of advanced care planning and having those difficult conversations early with your loved one about the kind of care they'd want when they get very sick. One thing I say to my patients all the time is most of us are going to have a period of time at the end of our lives where we're going to need a lot of care, minus any kind of big accident, right? Most of us will need a lot of care. And there may be periods of time when we can't speak for ourselves or express our wishes. And so it's important to know what our loved ones would want if they got very sick. And this is something that I have to say my parents were both really great about. My dad, after he had heart surgery when he was 85 and he did great, but after that he was like, enough. We're not doing that kind of thing again. And we sat down and filled out an advanced directive together that I cannot say enough about how helpful that has been. I had and I'll share one more experience. I had a dear friend who had a terrible accident. He was in his 40s, but he survived the accident and lived for about 18 months after. But and he had been sick and kind of in and out of the hospital, and we had sort of lost track, right, of how sick he was. People would come and visit. We say, oh, well, he's in the hospital. He's having a tough time. It's okay. He'll be out soon. But at some point during that process, some really wise healthcare provider had sat down with him and said, let's do an advanced directive. And they did. And when it came closer to end of life for him, and none of us saw it, including me. I've been a critical care nurse and cardiology nurse for years, and it went right over my head. But when it came closer to end of life for him, I remember there was a situation where there was a test that was being talked about, and getting him to that test would have caused a lot of suffering. And another wise healthcare provider brought out that advanced directive, and it was like having him there in the room saying, what are you guys doing? I told you I didn't want this. So it's an advanced directive is a way to make sure that your voice is there to guide your loved ones, even when you can't be. So I can't say enough about the importance of advanced care planning for caregivers, but even more for people who have health issues, for our patients, because it's a way to continue to take care of your family, even when you're not able to do that anymore the way you want to.
I first want to say thank you to Martha for sharing that story. I'm very sorry, but it's a beautiful thing that you've done. Jay as well, thank you for sharing your story. Before we wrap up today, there's one topic I want to touch on that Jay just mentioned, which is more practical tips kind of for families as they're having those discussions to make sure their family members can advocate for themselves when they maybe verbally can't in that moment. Jay, do you mind talking a little bit more about practical tips for advanced care directives, things like that?
Not at all. There are some tremendous free resources out there that are available to all of us. Many people will do advanced directives with an attorney, and I think that's incredibly appropriate. And if that's something that's available to you, that's great. But there are a couple of different wonderful resources. Prepare for Your Care is one of my favorites. It's what one of the things I love about it is I know you guys are based in California. We're based in Maryland. It has advanced directives that meet the legal requirements for every state. So you would look up Prepare for Your Care and then put in California. And you're able to go to download a PDF and have an interactive, you can kind of type into, it's one of those PDFs you can enter information into, and have a beautiful conversation with a family member about the kind of care they would want if they got very sick. An advanced directive is always made up of two parts. The first part is naming your decision makers. Highly recommend, if you don't do anything else, everyone should name a decision maker and put that decision maker on paper. But the second part of an advanced directive is the living will portion. And this is not a last will and testament. This is not what happens to all your stuff. That's important too, don't get me wrong. And that's probably a good topic for a different podcast. But the living will is about the kind of care that you would want at the end of life, and things that you might not want. Like folks might not want to be kept alive in a coma, or they might not want to have a feeding tube if they needed to have that long term, or a breathing machine if they needed to have that long term. And a good advanced directive like Prepare for Your Care. 5 Wishes is another one that I love. We'll kind of walk you through those decisions. There's also, if you have a family member you'd like to have this conversation with, but if they're a little touchy about it, there's a great game called Go Wish. And we actually just got funding to use that in our heart failure clinic, Martha. I don't know if I told you that, but it's a less sort of intimidating way to talk about those things that are important to you when you get sicker and as you approach end of life. So if you have somebody who's reluctant, that's a nice resource.
And just in terms of adding to that, I think if you can name the person who you would like to make decisions, and then sometimes that second part, the living will, is pretty hard. Something you can also do is say whether or not they have latitude to make decisions, or whether you want to specify decisions. And sometimes you're not sure about all the treatments that are listed on a living will. So you can, answer the questions you're sure about and also say, I'm not totally sure about this one. So for instance, dialysis is one of those things that people are like, well, it depends on the situation. And so making that clear that your surrogate decision maker has freedom to make choices as they see fit based on how they know you and your values, versus, no, I really want my wishes followed explicitly the way I've stated them. And that can be really important. I think, coming back to the basics right now, it is important to normalize these conversations and just to say, when there is a loss, to just circle back and talk to each other about what happened. It's really good to process what happened at the end of life, and then to think about, hey, is that what I would want to happen to me? Could I make those same choices? And so sometimes that can open up a door. People will often see television shows that describe a particular scenario, and that is rarely what will actually happen in real life. CPR represented on TV is not CPR in real life, but it can be a way to open the conversation. And so I just think normalize it when you can, and try to have a conversation as far as your family member will let you go with it, and then also get it documented, because it's not true in healthcare unless it's written down.
I want to say one last thing, if I could, about advanced care planning, because let's be honest, I could talk about it all day, but probably the most important thing is I a lot of times have patients say, "Oh, I think I should choose my oldest son, but I don't think he'd be able to do this." It's not a popularity contest. It's not a who do you love the most contest. It's who you think could stand in your place making decisions for you, and who would be comfortable interfacing with medical teams. And so I often have to say that to folks, it's not about who you love the most. Pick somebody who would be a good advocate and who would listen to what's important to you and represent that.
And it's not necessary when you document to tell the people, it's not required, but it is a really nice thing to do, to let your family know who you've chosen and where the document lives in your house, or in your medical record. It's really nice if you can do that. And you don't have to explain your reasons, but it is nice, if you have someone who's your primary caregiver, they're doing your day-to-day help in the home, and that's not the person you choose to be your decision maker, that's okay. But it probably is worth a little conversation about it.
Um, Martha, that's a great point. I have struggled with an advanced directive, and the conversation with my friends and my wife is related to me struggling with what I want right now. And part of my struggle has to do with the advancements of technology, and also the fact that I was a dancer for so long in my life and want to have some control over my body. And so reconciling what the law and what medical practitioners need from me to help make decisions, and then how to make sure that the person who is going to be in that position is well informed, it is hard. And if you don't start, then you're not going to have a chance to have a voice, and decisions will be just made for you, and it's going to be hard for everyone. So my deadline was last Christmas as a gift to my wife to have my advanced directive done. It is not yet done. And now my deadline is this Christmas. So, yeah. So more on that, and hopefully there will be an accompanied blog post with this podcast saying that it is done, and people can learn from that experience. But like most of the things that Ashwini and I have been talking about, and thank you for joining us today, these dynamics involve family conversations or trusted loved ones conversations where it is really useful to be somewhat transparent and start opening up around the desires and the needs that we have and the actual place that we are in our lives, which we believe at Promise Day helps make sure that every day we get the best possible outcome that we could get, rather than some sort of suboptimal outcome along the way that makes it harder and harder. So thank you for being so generous with your time and your information and some suggestions personally, and the professional research and practices that you're engaged with your patients on a almost daily basis. Very grateful for our time today, and I'm sure your patients are too.
Thank you guys for having us. What
Thanks for having
exciting
us.
work you're doing.
As we wrap up, we do like to do a little exercise with our guests where we ask you to give us one tip for our listeners that they could use to pay themselves forward. I know mine from hearing your conversation today would be to pay a little extra attention to your family members when you see them next, and just keep an eye out for potential signs that they might need a little bit of extra help. And try and go up to them and bring it up as cautiously and politely as you can. Really out of goodwill and a desire to be there to help them. I encourage you all to do that. How about you, Martha?
Oh, the things that we say other people should do but haven't done ourselves.
For
So,
sure.
you know, I know my mom has documented her wishes, but I haven't seen the document. So I think a little tip is in that case to go ahead and ask if it would be all right if I reviewed them. And I'll just take that away as my own goal for the holidays, Erin.
Oh, I love that. I loved all the talk about caregivers strengths and self-care, and so I'm taking that with me, and I hope some of the caregivers too, that look around you for people who want to help, and don't be afraid to ask.
My 60 seconds. So the way I frame this is, if I had 60 seconds to do something to pay myself forward, I have to make sure that we have this from my wife and I. It is a gift. So what I have done, and it took 10 seconds, is I put a 2-hour hold on my calendar to figure out this advanced directive with some of the resources, Jay, that you have, some other resources that I got from others, so that I will do it, so that I can give it on Christmas and be done with it.
I want to thank you both again. Your stories mean an extraordinary amount to me and to Erin and to our listeners. Thank you for being so open and for coming and joining us today. And for all the work that you do. Erin and I will make sure to include access to all the resources that we've mentioned in today's episode in our description and on our website. So for any of you listeners out there, if you want to learn a little bit more about Jay and Martha's work, or visit any of the programs they recommended, we highly encourage you to do so. And be sure to email us at podcast@promiseday.com if you have any questions or would like to reach out to either Jay or Martha. Please feel free to do so. I'm sure they would be very happy to hear from you. And thank you all again for joining us today. We really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you. All right,
Take
take
care,
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, shall we do our debrief, Erin?
Let's do it.
How are you feeling?
I feel pretty good. I like their constant guidance to go back and talk to primary care. Like the observations that we have are our own observations, and there can always be something else going on. So it's really important to make sure that you always go back to medical professionals. And that it's also true that like contextual information matters a lot too. So if you're seeing something as a family, right, often we just get these snapshots in time rather than a continuous picture, depending on how close we are as family members. It can be really useful to have that that snapshot conversation with someone around the holidays that they haven't seen someone in a while, and kind of gut check that with someone who spent a lot of time with someone too. So it's a family thing, family process. I love what Martha said around people not calling you, because everyone's got different things in our lives and are busy or not busy, but behavioral changes even like that, you can be like, oh, that's interesting, I really haven't heard in a while. Like I do need to reach out. We're at a point in our family's life cycle now where I do need to behave a little bit differently. And what does that look like? How do I make that conversation. And that thing around the medications not being done at the end of the month, I think it's worth us all thinking about that, right? Anyone who's taking medications or with someone who's taking medications, like, that can be a really touchy conversation in and of itself. But just, like, are they there? Are they not? And if, what does that mean? How can we get to the best possible outcomes? The grooming thing is challenging. For those who are watching video, I got a haircut today and I definitely look better when I am groomed or not, but that doesn't mean that I'm also not like working and like making things happen in another context. So some of these things are like, yeah, look for the grooming too, but that's, it becomes personal at all these different levels, right? Like even the medication level can be personal. Like, I don't want you looking at my medication being taken or done. So, I mean, these are complex conversations, but if we don't have them, then we're probably doing, a little bit of a disservice to the best possible outcome. So
I think it's a combination, it's so subjective. It depends on your family relationship and what that individual is comfortable with and what they're not. But as long as you come at it with goodwill and you're just keeping an eye on things, you can kind of start to build up a little data in your head about kind of what's going on. You don't see your family as often. Most of us don't see our family as often as we'd like to. So just keeping our eyes peeled, even if you don't necessarily do anything about it right now, is still good to do. You can at least have a reference point each year in terms of kind of what's changing and what's staying the same.
yeah, totally. The other, the thing that I'm also thinking about, like for our listeners too, is Ashwini and I are your professional note takers in these conversations. So go to the blog and look at the stuff that will be linked there for the conversation that we've had too. There are some things that I'm going to be using directly from this conversation. Some of them have already been suggested to me in the past, but like actually, sometimes we need to hear things a couple different times in a couple of different ways to get them done. I think it was Martha also who said we come to healthcare in the US for medicine and hope that like medicine provides the outcome. I think what we've heard from different guests is like that's not always true. Like medicine can provide the outcome, but sometimes there is a holistic and there's a bigger picture to be thinking about. Medicine's a part of like can be a part of the picture. It's very likely a big part of the picture, and there's technology that is saving lives every day. There's medicine that is saving lives every day.
We're all probably inevitably going to be caregiving in some capacity. We'll all have family members who need our care. We're a part of a community. And even your healthcare providers are probably caregivers in some capacity too, So just humanizing everyone to a certain extent and recognizing that this is a universal experience, Martha and Jay both work professionally in the space, but also have personal experiences and are probably coming to the advice that they provide from their personal experience. Just recognizing that. Well, as always, Erin, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Another great episode under the belt, which is awesome. So I will thank all of you for listening. Again, please feel free to email us at podcast@palmistday.com if you have any questions or have any recommendations on episodes that we should cover next. We are working very hard to make sure that the Palmist Day blog is up and ready and updated with all relevant information for you. So please be sure to check out palmistday.com. If you'd like to follow up on any of the resources or advice that we discussed in today's episode, and we will see you next time. Take care.
See you next time.
Thank you for joining the Palmist Day podcast today. Please remember that all of the information provided in this podcast is informational only. Medical advice is at the purview of your medical professionals, so please consult them to make sure you're getting optimal care. To make sure you don't miss our next conversation, please be sure to subscribe. You can also visit our website at palmistday.com for more insights and resources on the topics we've covered today. Share the podcast on social media. We are on x.com, of course, but also be sure to include it in any kind of iMessage or WhatsApp groups you're a part of. It's a great way for others to discover this content and have valuable conversations with their family members. Take care, and we will see you next time.